Welcome back to the Contender Series breakdowns, and we are going over week 9 this week, which is the second last week for this season. It seems like this Contender Series has really flown by over the last several weeks, but I'm very happy with the results and the amount of support we've been getting as well. So shout out to all of you guys that have been checking out the channel and the breakdowns on a week-to-week basis. So much so that last week I was pushed behind in terms of dropping the breakdown, and we dropped it mere hours before the card was actually supposed to kick off, and we still managed to hit close to 2,000 views on that podcast. So I want to shout out every single one of you guys for waiting for those breakdowns and then consuming it when it drops as well. I'm sure you guys are happy with this Monday night drop for it, so you have plenty of time to get your action in, or at least hear what my thoughts are before you do. Didn't do too hot last week. Obviously, we went 2 and 3 on predictions. The two that mattered, though, are the ones that I was very happy about. The lock of the night, obviously, coming through with Vinicius Oliveira. It was the violence in that fight that I ended up going with, and that came through with relative ease. And then the underdog in the main event comes through even easier. I think it's a sub 1 minute knockout for Danny Barlow as he punches his ticket to the UFC after knocking out Raheem Forrest. So very happy to be on the bullseye with those. Kind of fumbled the bag a little bit with the other spots, but very happy that those were the two that I was honing in the most, and the Patreon folks were able to get in on that, and we're happy about that as well. Reminder that there is a Bellator card this week as well, so I'll be dropping a breakdown for that later this week, so keep your eyes out for that. And also there's an LFA card, so if you want breakdowns for those, I only do those for the written form, and I only do those for the Patreon folks. So if you want to get LFA action as well and LFA predictions, check out the link in the description below for the Lock of the Night Patreon page, and that's where you'll be able to find it. And then lastly, just a quick plug for the MMA Fight Archive. You want to find out how I know about how I know so much about these fighters that I'm about to break down for you guys, or how I find out so much about the LFA fights, the ACA fights, the KSW fights, all of that. I have direct links to all these fighters from past fights that they've had on the MMA Fight Archive. Link for that is also in the description below, and you can check it out for 7 days for free. It's a free trial for you guys to try it out, and if you like it, you can hop on board. If not, it is what it is, but make sure you guys check it out. We have over 2,300 fighter profiles on there right now. I'm adding new ones pretty much daily so that we can stay on top of this crazy MMA schedule that we got always, every single weekend. There's always some fights, but the MMA Fight Archive, make sure that you guys have everything that you guys need to leave no stone unturned, and there is a reason one of the main commentators on the Contender Series uses this service to provide you guys with as much information as possible. Again, check it out. Link in the description below. All right, let's get right into the breakdowns for week 9 of the Contender Series. First fight up between Mauricio Ruffy and Raymond Magomedaliev. Ruffy, as soon as you start watching his tape, you can see that he takes a lot of inspiration from Conor McGregor. The guy has his karate type stance, the way he shoots his shots down the pipe with his power hand, whether it's his left hand from the southpaw position or the right hand from the orthodox position. He loves to land that power on his opponents. He uses a good variety of kicks from up the middle to maintain his distance, as well as his footwork to stay on the outside where he ends up doing the best amount of work. You see some flashes of, flashy striking from him in terms of his spinning back kicks that he's been able to land on a couple of opponents, but also his ability to just show out when he feels very comfortable against a lot of the guys he's going up against. His lone defeat came against Manuel Sosa, who has competed on the PFL Challenger Series a couple times. Some people may recognize him. He's a hot prospect, and we saw Ruffy do a decent job in terms of picking him apart from distance, but it was one ill-fated scenario where Sosa got him up against a cage and was able to put a combination together to put him out. But Ruffy is a very impressive fighter in terms of his ability to land his distance shots and try to find that kill shot to put his opponents down. But the most impressive part of his game is his ability to keep his fights upright. He has a solid takedown defense game, which is going to be very important for him, especially in this matchup against the Dagestani Russian that he has in Magomedaliev. Magomedaliev is 10-1 with his most recent victory coming over Impa Kasanganay from earlier this year, where he beat him by split decision. His lone defeat came against regional scene standout James Nakashima from back in 2018, where Nakashima had a way better gas tank and was able to inflict some big damage and control Magomedaliev down the stretch and pick up a win by decision. Magomedaliev, not the most smothering of wrestlers as you would expect from somebody that got a stamp of approval from Islam Makhachev, but he does try to implement his wrestling, and I gotta be honest, I'm not the most impressed with it. His inability to control his opponents on the ground, and even some of the lackluster takedown attempts that I've seen from him, I'm kind of surprised that Makhachev was willing to tweet out about this guy and be like, hey, watch out for this guy. And then in return, Bahayo, training partner of Maurizio Ruffy, was like, hey, this is my guy. Just watch what we're able to do. And I'm looking forward to seeing the performance that Ruffy can put together here. And that's the side that I'm leaning on. I know he's the underdog around that plus 195 range, but I think his takedown defense is good enough here that he can utilize his striking advantage, which will end up being the difference maker here. Magomedaliev looks like a decent striker and has good combinations up his sleeve. However, I feel that Ruffy will do a good enough job in terms of, like I said, keeping this fight upright, maintaining his distance, and then eventually finding that kill shot down the pipe to put Magomedaliev out cold. So give me Ruffy to kick off the card with a solid underdog spot. Next up, we got Gadzhiyasulov going up against Jose Daniel Medina. I'm going to keep this one short because we got a minus 1,200 favorite who is more than worthy of this price tag considering the matchup that he has. Gadzhiyasulov, I'm just going to go with Magomed just to keep this easy. But he is an undefeated prospect. He has some decent skills, but I got to say that he hasn't really been facing the toughest level of competition. His most recent fight was against a 38-year-old fighter who had some decent success of his own at certain spots in this fight. Was able to hurt Magomed a couple times as well, but it was ultimately Magomed's wrestling that was able to save him and get him into safer positions where he can get off his own ground and pound and damage of his own. He does a decent job of that wrist ride position where he holds the back of his opponent while controlling the far wrist so that he can let his other hand go and really start to inflict damage there. But I have some question marks in terms of the level of opponents that he's been beating and how high level he can actually take this when he gets to the UFC, if he ends up getting to the UFC. But luckily for him, he's fighting a guy in Medina who, not the greatest in my opinion. I believe he's 11-2 over his professional career. He took his last loss at the end of 2019 and has been able to put together nothing but wins since this COVID era has taken place. He looks to be a guy that likes to slug it out. He's a striker and has decent durability as well. But he also has that fighter mentality that we've been seeing a lot from these Latino fighters that are coming into the Contender Series, specifically the Peruvian guys, but guys that enjoy pocket exchanges and wars. However, I think Medina is going to struggle with the grapple-heavy approach from Gadzhiyasulov, which will allow him to keep this fight safe, keep it away from where Medina really wants to be, which is striking and landing his punches. But I just don't expect that to happen here with Magomedov controlling dictating the pace of this fight, dictating where it takes place, and ultimately that will be where Medina is on his back, unable to get much off here. I don't really like the minus 1,200 line here. I just don't think that this is a guy that you should go out there and trust to, put minus 1,200 on, especially with how little that does for a parlay. I'm going to pass on this fight all in all. Even his props just aren't that good enough for me. I have question marks about his specific skill set and how high he can, or how far he can take it. But he's just lucky that he's getting a good enough opposition here, a good enough style matchup here that he should be able to shine. So give me Magomed Gadzhiyasulov to get his hand raised, and I think it comes inside the distance, probably in the second or third round. Next up, we got Eduardo Matias Torres going up against Victor Hugo Silva. Loser has to drop one of those names because why do you have three names coming into this? I find it's always with the Latino fighters that this ends up happening. Anyway, so we'll kick it off with Torres here, who has an impressive 16-1 record, with his only loss coming to Helen Hernandez, who is a former UFC fighter that went 0-2 and was promptly cut. However, it's cut him some slack. He lost to Jack Shore and Marlon Vera, and then the UFC was like, you know what? We don't need this guy. So, he's a decent fighter, but I just don't think he's the greatest fighter, which is, in my opinion, seeing that loss on Torres' record, it's a little bit of a question mark. But Torres looks like a guy that prefers to strike. He throws in combinations. He's very deadly in the clinch in terms of landing his elbows and knees. It often looks like his opponents try to take him to the ground, but I've seen good enough takedown defense from him that he's able to keep fights upright so that he can land his damage. But he's not a guy that does anything that jumps off the page to me. He's a solid fighter all around. Like I said, he has solid experience, although the level of competition outside of Helen Hernandez that he's been going up against, a little bit questionable for me in terms of saying that this guy deserves to actually make it to the UFC. But he has a decent enough matchup here in Victor Hugo Silva, who's a guy that's on a 12-fight winning streak that originated in 2015. However, I just don't know if that Silva is the guy that's going to be able to expose Torres here. Silva's nickname is Striker, but all the tape that I've watched of him recently is him looking to take opponents to the ground and grind them out. So I don't know if he's trying to, throw the opponents off the trail here in terms of just saying, okay, this guy's going to come out here and strike, but he often looks to go out there and grapple, and it's not the most impressive grappling either. I'm not the most impressed with his wrestling and his ability to get fights to the ground, but might be able to work here against a guy like Torres, but I feel like Torres should be able to keep this fight upright. And then in the striking realm, Silva has some decent striking and some good power, but I just don't believe in his ability to put on enough volume that'll keep Torres from throwing his own volume. Silva has a lot of experience, 27 fights worth of experience, but I just don't really see what he offers that even gets him, possible or gives him the ability to fight on the Contender Series. I don't really understand that, but I'm going to go with the small dog shot here on Torres. I feel like Torres should be able to stop the takedowns, keep this fight upright, and land his damage in all the spots, even in defensive spots. When he's trying to stop the takedowns of Silva, I expect him to be landing elbows and landing offense while Silva is trying to establish position, but I don't believe in his ability to establish it here against a guy like Torres. Both these guys, in my opinion, very low level. If either of them end up making it to the UFC, I'd be surprised if they end up having more than 3 fights. But I'm going to go with Torres here, and I believe that he's going to land more damage, and he ends up winning this fight by decision. Final matchup, and it's the main event of the card here, is going to be between Rodolfo Bellato and Murtaza Talha. Bellato is a Contender Series alum who has fought Vitor Petrino last year and ended up coming up short that night. He got knocked out in the second round in that fight. He's had 2 wins in the LFA since that matchup. He picked up one against a very low-level opponent who he was able to finish pretty easily, and then he picked up the interim LFA light heavyweight title last time around as he defeated a former a former Contender Series alum in Asacio dos Santos. That was a fight where he took a grapple-heavy approach, trying to utilize his BJJ brown belt to overwhelm dos Santos on the ground, taking him down over and over again, controlling him in the clinch, and just not really giving him much room to breathe. We saw Bellato land solid enough damage, but was really never threatening in terms of a serious submission or a finish of any sort. He just looked like he wanted to go the 25 minutes and showcase that he has a grappling game that he can implement as well. He has some solid punching power as well, but I just don't know if he has what it takes to make it at the UFC level. Talha, on the other hand, he has a combined 18 amateur and professional fights, and he has been flawless in every single one of them. He is 6-0 thus far with his professional career, finishing every single one of his fights. He does a great job in terms of chain wrestling and grappling, in terms of his ability to get opponents to the ground and control them and do big damage from on top. He does a great job in terms of mat returning his opponents if they're able to work their way back to his feet, and he does a great job in terms of transitioning from position to position, eventually getting that dominant position that's required to end up getting his finishes. His striking is still a bit of a question mark here because the majority of his fights end up in the grappling realm almost immediately. But I love everything I've seen from this guy thus far. He has a win over current UFC fighter Anton Turkalj from the amateur scene as well. He trains out of the KHK team in Bahrain, but has finished up this training camp over at Extreme Couture in preparation for this matchup. As much as I think that Bellato has some solid experience, it might be the most experienced opponent that Talha has faced. I just don't think that Bellato will be able to stop the grappling and the eventual the takedowns and the top pressure that he'll be facing from Talha here. I don't think that Bellato's brown belt will be good enough in terms of threatening Talha enough, which will allow Talha to eventually find a position where he can posture up and land some big shots from on top. I get why Talha is close to a minus 300 favorite here. He might even end up looking minus 400 or minus 500 once this fight is all over with. Give me Talha to dominate here and earn his contract to the UFC. There you guys go. Breakdowns on all 4 fights for this Week 9 Contender Series card. Again, we got UFC breakdowns coming out for you guys either Tuesday or Wednesday, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Also, Bellator coming out later this week, and then LFA strictly written breakdowns on the Patreon page. Check the link in the description below for that. Appreciate all the love. Appreciate all the support. Good luck on all your action this week, folks, and I'll see you guys again in a few days. Peace.